The original Little Nightmares 2 was very different. The game was toned down to fit the teen rating, entire monsters and locations were either cut down or removed entirely, even the plot of the game was different. This is why the original Little Nightmares 2 was even more terrifying than the final game. Hello, hi, you're watching Rant, and today we're looking at the original Little Nightmares 2. Huge thanks to Viking Gaming for the footage used in this video, his channel will be in the description. This is an analysis of the original vision for the game and what could have been. Mono was originally going to have blue skin, and clothing resembling that of Thin Man, but this was changed as to not spoil the Thin Man twist. The original Wilderness chapter would have been much longer. This is seen in concept art and a data mined alpha build of the level found in the game files. Here we see a more gruesome take on the hunter's domain, with viewers caught in traps and a taxidermied pig with its insides spilling out. Ugh. While this was cut due to rating issues, Tarsier Studios seems to have repurposed this design in their upcoming game Reanimal, as, being an 18, there are less limitations on how dark they can go. Before reaching the hunter's shack, Mono would have descended down a deep well and traversed over a vast open field, while the hunter attempts to snipe us from the safety of his watchtower. Six is with us here because originally we were going to find her in the Pale City, with the Wilderness being a later chapter in the game. A more significant cut location is the Gnome's Shelter, a dilapidated building infested with gnomes. There's an open bunker near the entrance, and the trees here match the ones seen in the alpha build. This suggests that the gnomes would have played a larger role in the story. The bunker may have housed similar puzzles to that of the hideaway, but after playing through the DLCs, I think I've had enough gnomes for a lifetime. One particularly haunting concept art illustrates a giant deer-like creature making its way through the trees. This is likely in reference to the forest spirit in Princess Mononoke, a film by Studio Ghibli known for their profound influence on Little Nightmares. But much like the cut bathhouse in the first game, this reference might have been too on the nose. It could also make the hunter seem less threatening, as he surely can't be at the top of the food chain with this beast lumbering around. The hunter's residence was originally going to look more warped and distorted, much like the buildings in the Pale City. This was likely changed because the Wilderness is quite far away from the signal tower, making its effects on the environment less pronounced. One of the more chilling aspects of the original design was the basement. In this version, Six would have been tied upside down, while Mono sat helplessly in a locked room with a chair. This can be seen in the Wilderness alpha build. You'll also notice that Six is wearing her raincoat here, an important detail that strengthens the idea that this was not meant to be the first chapter. And finally, the hunter's death was initially going to be a lot more violent. Concept art depicts him getting stuck in his own bear trap before we finish him off. This was later modified to a more toned down version, where the hunter is largely off screen during his death, to maintain the game's teen rating. The teacher was originally going to have cords extending from her head, as if another more powerful entity was controlling her, almost like a puppet, with the cords being the strings. But that's not all. Believe it or not, the teacher was going to have wings. In an interview with one of the developers, it was revealed that there was an idea to give her wings due to her bird-like face, but ultimately the concept was scrapped, as the idea was likely too absurd for the game. The school itself was going to be larger and more complex. It would have included a gym area, a shower room, and the science lab would have been far bigger. A fan animation by The Oldest Nightmare gives us a glimpse of what this expanded school would have looked like. Two monsters were cut from this chapter, the first being the lunch lady, who is supposed to oversee the cafeteria section. Concept art depicts her preparing food in a grimy kitchen, setting the tone for what was sure to be a grotesque encounter. While she didn't make it into the game, her lifeless body can be seen in a hidden room, suggesting that the bullies were responsible for her death. This is a fan-made model made by Santeri Kivioja? Sorry if I mispronounced that name, but go check him out. The second cut monster is the overlord of the school, the principal, who appears in both concept art and a painting in the game. In a now deleted post from Bandai Namco, the principal was described as stuffed in his office like always, which could mean one of two things. Either the principal is dead, or he symbolizes the neglect of children, completely unaware of the chaos and abuse unfolding in his school. The extensions protruding from his head match the ones seen in the teacher concepts, implying that, just like her, the principal is under the control of some greater force. But who exactly? It would have to be someone who knew Six and Mono would enter the school prior to their arrival, giving them time and reason to station the teacher and the principal in the building, waiting for them. Perhaps with the intent to stop them before they reach the signal tower. But to stop them from doing what exactly? And who is controlling them? The hospital was initially designed to be much larger, with many more rooms to explore. The doctor was meant to appear even more grotesque, with a warped, droopy face, heightening his unsettling appearance. While the concept art does look terrifying, the exaggerated features features may have looked a little silly in the game's art style. Concept art reveals that this chapter would have featured other children, and the patients themselves were originally conceived as a sort of hybrid between human and mannequin, escalating the sense of dread as it's insinuated that these early patients were once viewers. This darker version of the hospital would have involved the doctor experimenting on children with cords protruding from their heads, implying that the doctor's role in the story would have been far more significant in the original vision for the game. I believe the cords were meant to function in a similar way to those in the school concept art, controlling the children through some mysterious force. However, some of these cords are attached to televisions. Perhaps these children weren't just passive subjects. They may have possessed powers similar to Mono's, which required them to be wired directly into the signal tower's transmission. These children might have been responsible for powering the ongoing broadcast, their life force being drained as they remained hooked to the system. However, the other children under the doctor's control may have been more hostile, much like the teacher and the principal once activated. We can see Six and Mono sneaking past them, which hints that these children were originally intended to act as secondary enemies, much like the hands and the bullies. This concept illustrates Six attempting to remove one of these cords from Mono's head, presumably leading to one of the televisions. Something tells me Mono would be more than enough to power the transmission on his own, perhaps too much, but that's for later in the video. Some concepts feature what appears to be the Ghost Kid from the digital comics, with his character model found in the game files. Could he have been a helpful ally, assisting us in our escape from the hospital, or another victim of the cords and the doctor's experiments, hunting us down against his will? Stay tuned, as this won't be the last you see of the Ghost Kid. There's a cut sequence of the patients surrounding a TV, much like the viewers, and judging by how captivated they are, they're likely watching a Rant video. We also see a different variation of the doctor operating on a patient. Originally, there were far more variations in patient designs, including an old one with a walking stick, among many others. This was likely changed as the Pale City is in a time loop, so it doesn't really make sense that one would grow old, especially since the patients in the final game were a lot less sentient, more resembling actual mannequins. As for the doctor, I don't believe he was the one pulling the strings behind the children's control outside of his experiment. Although he plays a significant role, he dies long before we uncover the true mystery of the tentacle-like cords. Later chapters still feature the cords, suggesting the doctor wasn't the only one responsible. Concept art also reinforces this idea, showing that even in the original game, the doctor meets a sticky end. While Six seems unperturbed by the doctor's death in the final game, the original envisioning would have seen her make the final blow, as concept art depicts Six holding his severed head. This implies that Six's dark nature was supposed to be revealed much earlier on. So who then is the true villain of the original Little Nightmares 2? The original version of Little Nightmares 2 envisioned the Pale City as much larger and a more central location, with most of the game taking place there. The viewers looked drastically different, one resembling a guest and another with a television for a head. Cut content from the pre-alpha build reveals an entire apartment block and a railway system, which was far more substantial than the brief chase sequence we got in the final game. Evidence of this expanded city is found in concept art of a subway station, alongside early trailer footage of Six and Mono boarding a train and concepts of them sitting inside. This suggests that the subway itself would be enough for its own chapter, further emphasizing the Pale City's scale. More footage from the pre-alpha build illustrates a room filled with phantom children frozen in place around a broken television. But who are these children? Unknown faceless victims? I don't think so. Originally, Thin Man had a completely different portrayal, depicted as a detective interrogating Mono from behind a desk. This suggests a more narrative-driven role, though Little Nightmares' lack of dialogue likely made it too difficult to implement. So Mono, you are the leading suspect behind the Hunter's death case. Did you? Concept art also depicts smoke billowing from Thin Man's head, possibly indicating his anger or his original death animation. There's at least 4 cut enemies in this chapter, which include the Baker, a broadcast actor seen in concept art and the digital comics and TV advertisements within newspapers in the game. He has cords protruding from his head, much like the teacher, principal, and the hospital children, suggesting that he too is controlled by an unknown force. Next we have the eye television, which would have absorbed viewers who were sent directly to the signal tower, creating the fleshy substance that is seen within, made from viewers' corpses. The moths were secondary enemies similar to the bullies, intended to be fought with melee weapons. Their animations still exist in the game files, and locked cages in the Pale City reference them as an Easter egg. The barber was a towering creature wielding massive scissors, residing in a hair salon. Some fans theorize that the Ghost Kid lost his arm to the barber, and had the game retained this enemy, we might have teamed up with the Ghost Kid to defeat him, after saving him from the hospital. However, his method of attack may have been deemed a little too graphic, telepathic, or he was cut due to time constraints. This is a fan-made recreation by Santeri Kivioja. Earlier, I said that mono would be more than enough to power the transmission, so perhaps while he was briefly attached to one of the cords feeding into the televisions, the exposure acted as a catalyst for the following events. The city quickly becomes consumed with the same fleshy walls inside the signal tower. The tower itself resembles a colossal head, with the viewers, among other creatures, walking willingly inside. This is accompanied by a giant flesh baby wading through the collapsing city. Mono can be seen dragging 6 through a blizzard, implying that snow was originally planned for this chapter. In the original game, the signal tower wasn't just controlling people, it was consuming them, before being overcome by the brief exposure to Mono and his powers, starting a chain reaction that covered the entire city with fleshy despair. One question remains: who was behind these events? You might be wondering why I haven't mentioned the comic kids, since character models for Lollipop Boy and Pigtails Girl exist in the game files, and they appear in the school and hospital areas in the digital comics. However, given that Pigtail Girl's glitching remain appears in the base game, it's likely these characters were never meant to be in Little Nightmares 2. Instead, they may have been planned for a DLC that was scrapped after Tarsier Studios decided to leave the franchise. Perhaps the comic kids would have embodied the Phantom Children from the Alpha build, suggesting that these shadowy beings are Thin Man's past victims. This idea is supported by the presence of Shadow 6 among the Phantom Children, who appears after 6 is captured by Thin Man in this chapter. This promotional image is interesting. It suggests that Mono and 6 entered the signal tower together, implying that 6 wasn't captured and that we would have witnessed her transformation into Monster 6 in real time. If that was the case, Thin Man may have been the original final boss, as concept art shows Mono and 6 still working together, even with 6 in her monstrous form. Therefore, the game's climax could have played out differently. Instead of the infamous betrayal, the ending would have focused on their desperate escape. Concept art depicts both characters on a sea of eyes, the very same place where 6 drops Mono in the first game. But in this version, it seems that neither 6 or Mono reached the door in time, leading to both of them falling together. However, only Mono survives the fall, foreshadowed in the pre-alpha build of the wilderness. But before that, the bulk of the chapter would have seen us being pursued by headless creatures, while Mono guides 6 through the signal tower, until we encountered an ominous corridor, housing gigantic titan-like creatures. A fan animation by Beni Tuli offers a glimpse of what this would have looked like. Mono's transformation would have taken place in a room filled with tentacle-like cords running into rectangular screens, suggesting a different reveal. In the original game, Mono wasn't just a victim of betrayal and the tower's influence. He was pulling the strings all along. The cords feeding into the signal tower give him complete control over the Pale City, from the teacher, the principal, to all the children in the hospital, using their life force to power the transmission in an endless loop. While the final game presents the signal tower itself as the villain, the original version would have seen Mono as the true villain of Little Nightmares 2, no longer a slave to the transmission, but its creator.